Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. The Week 3 PTS patch notes are upon us. Did ZOS deliver? Did they hear the community's feedback? Let's jump into it and check it out. So we've already discussed this section a bit. It was in their feedback post that they gave last week. But to quickly sum it up, essentially sticky damage and heal over time effects, so ones that apply to an enemy or apply to a player and follow them, these will be staying at the increased durations that they initially proposed with week 1 of the PTS. Ground damage and heal over time effects, or static dots and hots, those will be returned back to that 10 to 15 second window that we are used to seeing from them, back at the 1 second frequencies. They are also lowering the cost of most of these static ground AoEs as well, so I imagine for update 35, sustain should be quite a bit better than it is currently on the live servers. So while I do definitely see this as a step in the right direction in comparison to weeks 1 and 2 on the PTS, overall I don't really know how this is any better of a system than what we currently have on the live servers. It doesn't do much for accessibility since we still have lots of shorter dots, and the damage amounts on these are lower than what we have on the live servers, so I don't know. I don't see how this is much benefit, not without further changes to other areas of the game which are not present in these patch notes. But we'll move on. For Dragonite's Ash Cloud, return the duration and tick rate of this ability and its morphs back to 15 seconds and 1 second rather than 20 seconds and 2 seconds. So after you add in the Eternal Mountain passive, Eruption is now back to that 18-second duration that we are used to from it. And by the way, for this video, I won't be digging into all the specific numbers from these skills like with the spreadsheets that I've been doing for this PTS, but that is something that I'm going to be doing over the rest of the week, so I should have some good info coming soon for each class with that. On to Necromancers, we have their Boneyard skill, return the duration and tick rate of this ability and its morphs to 10 seconds and 1 second, reduce the cost, and reduce the bonus damage when consuming a corpse to 30%, down from 50%. So compared to most other class AoEs, Boneyard was overperforming on weeks 1 and 2 of the PTS, but instead of boosting those other class AoEs up, they've decided to nerf Boneyard instead. It should still do really good damage though. The next one is a really good change for the Necro's Spirit Guardian, fixed an issue where we missed a 0 on this pet's total health. It is now 30,000 health rather than 3,000, meaning its owner can take up to 300,000 damage over its duration before it will perish early, significantly increasing its ability to exist as a tool for your bidding for more than a few seconds. So this was pretty awful for PvE in weeks 1 and 2, so I'm glad to see they adjusted it. Moving on to Nightblade's Path of Darkness. This will apply to both Twisting Path and Refreshing Path. They return the duration and tick rate of this ability in its morphs to 10 seconds and 1 second, and then on Twisting Path, reduce the cost to 2,700. So like I mentioned, I'm not digging into the numbers yet in this video, but from early reports I've seen, Twisting is still pretty far down on the list of dots for a Nightblade to run. But I don't want to speculate too much there without doing more testing myself. For Veiled Strike, this is Concealed Weapon and Surprise Attack. They've taken the stun off of this now. It did seem like the PvP community was complaining that this skill was a bit too overloaded, so I guess this takes some of that away without hurting it in PvE. So the additions to each morph that were added in week 1 are still here to stay. And then finally for Nightblade's Shadow Cloak is going down to 14% of your missing health per tick instead of 20%. Moving on to Sorcerers, Crystal Weapon got another adjustment, so now instead of the 2 instances of damage dealing 65% of a normal ranged spammable each, they will deal 100% on the first hit and 30% on the second hit. So, I mean, I guess this is slightly better to account for scenarios where you might miss a light attack here and there. It's definitely an improvement. You're not as punished for that, but overall, this doesn't really change the overall power of this, assuming that you are weaving correctly. The 2 components of this added together are still a lower tooltip than some of the other spammable options that we have access to if we're in melee. And then at that point, I think I'd just rather use a different spammable and morph this to Crystal Fragments and then have a nice strong proc to fire whenever it's available. So kind of sucks to see this fun skill introduced and then get immediately nuked 1 patch later. I don't think it's awful, especially for range builds. It's still a decent amount of damage for a spammable. It's just, I don't know, it doesn't feel special anymore. It likely won't be super popular going forward without further adjustments. Next up, Bound Armaments was increased back by 44%. This is pretty big. This skill was one of the ones that left me really scratching my head in weeks 1 and 2, as the proc from it was worse than most spammables after they nerfed it by 38%. So this will still end up a little weaker than it is right now on the live servers, because if you nerf it by 38% and then add 44% onto that nerfed amount, it still ends up lower than the original amount by about 10%. but definitely looks like a skill that will be worth running again. Next up is Lightning Splash, so same treatment here as the other static AoEs, 10 seconds now with 1 second tick frequencies and reduced cost. Then the Liquid Lightning Morph will now be 15 seconds instead of the 14 seconds we have on live, and this is a trend we'll see continue with many of the other dots that were previously 14 seconds long. Finally, with Overload, fixed an issue where you could not light or heavy attack if this ultimate was toggled and you cast another ultimate. This was a pretty annoying bug and you got stuck unless you manually untoggled it, so I'm glad to see that this issue was taken care of. Moving on to Templars, Spear Shards got the same 10-second treatment and cost reduction, and then Blazing Spear actually got a little buff here. I think this may be to compensate for it no longer being one of the few sources to proc Burning Light, so nice to see that this one got a little bit extra added on. The upfront hit from this was already a very nice amount of AoE damage, so this could be an even stronger AoE spamming option if you wanted to use it that way. Should be very much worth using still as a traditional AoE dot as well. Moving on to Wardens, Winter's Revenge got the same treatment here as the other ground AoEs. I wish this would at least deal as much damage as the Necro's Boneyard. Hopefully this one can get a little more love before it goes live. And then Arctic Blast, this was one of my big complaints with the earlier PTS patches. It was a fun idea for a new ice ability for DPS Wardens to use, but the damage on it was just really low. So now it looks like it actually might be worth a cast now. It's really cool. It's a stun on the initial hit, which a lot of people have been asking for. It's a heal on the initial cast as well, and it looks like it might be at least an okay dot to have on you. Probably not one of the stronger ones, but yeah, I'll have to dig into it a little bit more this week. I did want to bring up that they said in their feedback post last week that they are planning some additional changes for the Sorcerer and Warden based on your feedback that will go on the PTS before Update 35 launches. So I assume that isn't referring to this set of patch notes and that we'll be seeing some more changes for these two classes coming soon, but who knows. For the bow, volley was adjusted the same way as all of the other ground dots. And then for the staff, Wall of Elements was adjusted in the same way as well. However, it did get some additional nerfs. Wall of Fire and its morphs now deal 10% increased damage against burning enemies, down from 20%. And then the Unstable Wall morph decreased the damage of this morph's explosion by approximately 33%. So the first one I think is pretty fair. As a flame ability, it already gets boosted by Engulfing Flames as well for another 6% damage to it, making the Inferno Staff the clear option for your back bar for staves. So this does bring it a little more in line with those other two elements, but it should still do a fair bit more damage than the Lightning and Ice versions. The second one though is gonna hurt it a good bit. Lots of people use Unstable Wall as a way to have an AoE spammable on their bar without necessarily needing to spec into an AoE setup. This is especially common on fights that are a bit more single target focused, but might have a few small sections where you need to have some nice AoE damage. And that 33% nerf to the explosion definitely brings it down well below the normal AoE spammable territory. So likely we'll need to slot a true AoE spammable for those scenarios now. To be fair, the skill really was fully loaded, having that full strength AoE spammable capability as well as a very strong AoE dot that could also keep up your back bar enchantments. Well, on weeks 1 and 2 of the PTS, it was definitely overperforming compared to other weapon line AoE abilities of similar functions, so I'll need to run the numbers still of course, but I think this probably brings it more in line with skills like Volley, Stampede, and Blade Cloak. It should still be a good ability to use, but I would have rather them give those other 3 abilities something extra to stand out in the way that Unstable Wall does, instead of taking away a cool, unique function from Unstable Wall. That said, I do think it was a bit too strong compared to where they currently had those other 3 balanced, but I'll definitely dive a lot deeper into that over this week. For two-hander, we have Carve getting a little bit of a bump back up, 33% increased damage. This should be probably about 20% weaker than it is on live still, but not taken down as far as it initially was on the PTS. For Stampede, they returned the duration and tick rate of this ability in its morphs to 15 seconds and 1 second, and then reduced the damage per tick by approximately 5%. The skill was pretty awful on weeks 1 and 2 of the PTS. They did nerf the ticks slightly again, but you should now get quite a few more ticks with it dealing damage every 1 second instead of every 2. So hopefully it will be in a little bit better place for week 3 of the PTS. One thing with these 2 skills that we have covered previously, but I'd like to quickly mention again, they said they like to have them at 15 seconds and 30 seconds to help them line up with a common denominator. However, Carve actually can't be recast at 30 seconds or it will fall off and start over at 12 seconds again. So I think they need to bump up Carve to last 32 seconds, and then you'd have that nice 2-second grace period to recast it and have it line up with every other Stampede cast. For Mystic Orb, this one is adjusted the same as the other static dots. It does look like it will move a tad bit slower though than what we have on the live servers, which is pretty nice. It will help to get more ticks in reliably when using it in melee range. And then finally for the skills, Caltrops is receiving the same adjustments with the Razor morph at 10 seconds and the Anti-Cavalry morph going to 15 seconds. For our gear sets, Merciless Charge was adjusted to again tick every 1 second. However, the tick rates will be drastically reduced from where they are on the live servers. Not really sure about this one. This was definitely not a super strong arena set for PvE in update 34. It was mostly Stampede's really high damage that was carrying it. The combo of the two was really great for damage, but I didn't think that the Maelstrom two-hander was that overperforming. It was only generally doing like maybe 4k DPS. So I'll have to look at this more and see if it's really worth running now. Then for the Black Rose dual wield, they fixed an issue where this set was not persisting through the entire duration of Blade Cloak or its morphs. So this wasn't increasing with that duration. Since they increased those skill lengths, I guess it was probably hard-coded to the lower lengths. So now it should be fixed and working properly. Then finally, Plague Break was adjusted again to not be able to proc on a group of enemies with just one AoE direct damage cast. So this is the same as it works on live, so you won't see any difference on that end. The main change is that the set now has a 20-second cooldown per target. So if your target does not die within that 10-second dot that you initially put on them, you don't just get to immediately reapply it as soon as it's gone like you can on live. I think it should still be great for PvE short burst stuff. It should still probably be really good in PvP, but not as overtuned as it is. Just keep that new limitation in mind now when you're using it. But that's it for the combat changes for the week 3 PTS. Overall, I actually think most of these were a step in the right direction from weeks 1 and 2 of the PTS, but don't feel like this is necessarily any better than what we have already on the live servers. And for the last section of this video, I just want to quickly go through some of the main pain points we've been bringing up and look at what they've adjusted and what still needs to be considered. As far as addressing the unfinished hybridization system, there is still no word on that. For the light attacks and weaving adjustments, they said this was to help the skill gap. However, after Empower and other bonuses, our light attacks are still very strong contributors to the overall DPS levels, but now require good uptimes as well to hit those numbers. So I don't think they've hit the mark on that one yet either. For the dot durations, I have a tentative check here that this was addressed. While we do still have those sticky dots that are longer, many of the other dots have now come back down to that 10 to 15 second range, which I think will probably help with the feel of combat, but this definitely needs some more testing, so that's why I put a tentative check instead of just saying that they resolved it. For the buff, debuff, uptime, accessibility, this is what many would agree is the source of the largest part of the power gap in PvE. No news on adjustments to that at this time. Next up, the issues that the 2-second tick frequencies were causing have been resolved for healing as well as enchantments and the overall feel of combat, so these should all feel a lot better now. For power creep and content creep, another topic that has not been addressed, they're bringing damage numbers down, but this isn't just affecting the top end, it's affecting almost everyone. So I won't go too deep into this topic in this video as we've already discussed it a lot recently, but this is just really important and probably most people's biggest concern about this patch. For sorcerers and wardens, again, another tentative check here. I know we didn't get a whole lot in week 3 of the notes, but they did mention that changes are coming, so I'll at least acknowledge that they have heard feedback and are working on it. For skill identity and usefulness, I think this one is probably a mixed bag right now. This is one that will need a bunch of further testing before we can really conclude anything on it. And then some other small things. I think EC needs to be present on the trial dummy to help light armor users, since medium armor gets access to the full 6k pin from Alkosh on it. And then they have resolved some of the reported bugs and scaling issues, but didn't mention all of them. Overall, still a ways to go. Lots of unaddressed issues, though they have made some small improvements over weeks 1 and 2. I actually went back and checked a video that I made in January of this year as well to see if they'd touched on the topics covered there for systems that needed to be improved, and so far, nada. I think stuff like this is a big part of why people are so frustrated with these massive sweeping changes they roll through, because we know there will be a ton of side effects that come from it that will still need to be cleaned up, but the track record just isn't there for them to do it. The hybridization system is unfinished, and so many of these quality of life and weird quirks that could be improved upon within the game are just left untouched patch after patch. Yet instead of cleaning up what they have, they just keep going full steam ahead with whatever is around the corner. I'd love if they could just stop for a moment and focus on fixing up the core of the game. Just take a deep breath and try and right this ship. As for me, I'm just going to keep digging into this PTS and giving all the feedback that I can and hoping for the best. And at this point, all we can do is sit and wait and see what they do with the info that they're given. I know a lot of people are really frustrated and tired, and I'll admit I'm a bit exhausted with all of this as well, but we still have a few weeks before it goes live, so we'll see what happens. That's going to wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already subbed, it helps out a ton. It's free, and you can always change your mind later if you're no longer interested in the content. But what do you all think about the new changes? Have you hopped on the PTS and checked it out? Let me know in the comments below. A big thanks to my current Patreon supporters and YouTube members. Link is in the description if you are interested in helping out that way. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougars Bay and the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Blake1816, Mordecai1212, Santanico, Nalandia, Hayat Spork, Florian, and Vadridi. Thanks again for stopping by. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.